This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Infoblox and Carasoft. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, modernizing the Marine Corps takes a huge step forward. The big three at the top of the military's to-do list and a 90% success rate for the Pentagon's cyber goals. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Marine Corps is on a technology modernization journey like the rest of the military. One of the most important elements of that journey is consolidating the Corps' networks into one. Shery Thomas is the outgoing Chief Technology Officer for Marine Corps Forces Cyberspace Command. He started a new job as Enterprise Information Officer for the Navy recently. At West 2025 in San Diego, he calls the progress the Marine Corps made in tech modernization tremendous.
We're able to see more. We're able to streamline the cybersecurity compliance and the risk posture, risk assessment, continuous monitoring of our programs of record, and the entirety of the Marine Corps Enterprise Network. We're also able to do data sharing, data collaboration in terms of integrated mission data fabric and seeing the totality of all the data and the information that is being passed through, whether it be from the tactical edge all the way to the enterprise, and making appropriate actions on it. At the same time, we have made headways on zero trust across the entirety of all of the 7 pillars and the different control areas within those pillars. And then from our staff, we are aligned in terms of cybersecurity from a training perspective, from an awareness perspective, from a cyber hygiene perspective for the entirety of the workforce. So when they touch a system, they treat it as a system of systems. It's like cybersecurity as a capability portfolio because it touches every single thing that we do.
When you talk about able to see more, what more are you able to see, and what pieces of your modernization journey contributed to you being able to see more across your networks?
Absolutely. So the Marine Corps started in a multi-year journey to unify the Marine Corps Enterprise Network. And what that means is there were a lot of disparate systems that were out there. Each of the Marine Expeditionary Forces, the training systems, the POR system, they were built individually, and cybersecurity was individual on that. The ability to take action on that from the enterprise, to see vulnerabilities, to see anomaly detection, to see adversary behavior, that is very critical, and to respond to it, because now you can do the last legs of zero trust, which are security incident event management and security orchestration and response very quickly, and it alleviates the burden on the tactical edge users and the 6s out that are forward deployed in terms of configuration and network management.
Talked about the 7 pillars of zero trust and that you've made headway on each of them. Is there one or two or several of them that you've made more progress than others on? Are there some where you're really going to dive in deep, the Marine Corps is in 2025?
Yes. So in particular, the identity pillar of zero trust, that is the most critical one, because that Marine or that individual touching a system, do we have enough zero trust in that? Do we have enough multi-factor authentication? And as adversary behavior changes, that multi-factor authentication has to be kept up in terms of biometrics or passkeys, the latest, greatest technologies that are out there. The second pillar that is equally important is data. Right data, right place, right time. Ensuring not just the data that's transposing between the two individuals, but the header and the footer information, and also, as everyone should be tracking, adversary actions such as Sol Typhoon, Vol Typhoon. These are underlying things that the adversary is doing in terms of that data and how it is getting changed. The ability to detect that.
How are you integrating kind of cutting edge technologies into the modernization journey that you've undertaken in the Marine Corps? A lot of discussion here, of course, about artificial intelligence, a lot of discussion about autonomy, those kinds of things. How are those integrating into your system of systems?
At the end of the day, the user, the tactical edge, should not be able to see the difference. And what I mean by that is transport agnosticity, multiple pathways for that DDoS environment, disrupted, dismounted, integrated low bandwidth operations, to be able to get that set of information from that tactical edge user up to the big cloud or the enterprise, and at the same time, that enterprise to be able to respond back. So what that means is making decisions in an appropriate manner, knowing artificial intelligence, post-quantum computing, right? It should not be adding more burden for configuration and more burden on the network latency, network jitter, bandwidth, anything like that. And then bringing that up or across in terms of not just information technology systems, but now looking at more operational technology. Is the power and energy grid, is the water systems that are chilling the data centers, are those being measured up in what kind of vulnerabilities exist in those cybersecurity systems that are out there?
Mm-hmm. You referenced DDoS a moment ago, and it sounds like what you're focused on is data and information at the edge for the warfighter rather than compute at the edge. Because for a long time, people were talking about computing at the edge, and it sounds like you've kind of gone beyond that now. Computing at the edge is not the point. The information for decision making is the point. Am I on the right track there?
Absolutely. It is improved network resiliency at the edge. So multiple different pathways, redundancy at the edge, and enabling all of that is automation and artificial intelligence. Being able to detect at that tactical edge what is the minimum set of bandwidth required for that Marine forward to be able to do their mission, and when they have reach-back capability, to provide that information ingress and egress back to the higher cloud to make appropriate decisions. And then through U.S. Cyber Command, we have regulations and restrictions such as cyber compliance, cyber regulations that DoD CISO is putting out too.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Zero Trust plan that you have for 2025, where you want to focus for that. Tell me more about where you want to focus more broadly in 2025 on the network modernization effort in the Marine Corps. What are the pieces of that you expect to see a lot of progress in the coming year?
Multi-partner environment and CJAD C2 integration, which is combined, joint, all-domain command and control. Assured C2 for everybody that is a Marine Corps user. So these three particular areas, how do we integrate with our joint and allied partners? How do we do multi-partner environment integration, meaning multiple different classifications of information, and it is not just swivel chair between users. That system, as you mentioned, the data should be able to predict what level of classification is it, and based on the identity, who gets that set of information at what point in time. And it should also figure out what is the validity of the data.
We just have a minute or so left, so I want to ask you in particular about CJAD C2 among the things that you mentioned there. What do you think the biggest potential obstacles, holdups might be to realizing the vision that not just the Marine Corps, but the entire military has for CJAD C2 as far as that information exchange that you just talked about?
Yes. What is the totality of all the information that's out there? That's the main thing, because as I mentioned, it is not just data between the two individuals or two different groups, but there is an underlying set of information. And then on top of that, we also hit on something called artificial intelligence. The ability for systems to generate their own information through generative AI, through adversary AI, ethical AI, that will be critical to figure out what is that right set of data, what is that right set of information that needs to get transposed at the right time, because that leads to mission effectiveness.
You can read more about Marine Corps modernization and Shery's new job as Enterprise Information Officer at the Navy on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the big three at the top of the military's to-do list. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
If something were to happen in the Pacific, could we respond, could we strike in kind across all domains with all of our services in tangent with the full power of the US military? And I think most people are going to pause before they answer that question. And to me, that's where IT superiority comes back in. Because if you don't know the answer to that question, then you probably don't have the information you need to understand all the power you have at hand and how it works together. So a big piece of superiority and deterrence is visibility, consolidation. You know, my biggest piece of advice to the military would be to leverage the power that they have.
Welcome back. Organizations across the military say they're looking for commercial solutions to their challenges. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the Space Force are just a couple of organizations that list speed as a main reason commercial solutions are appealing. Mark Senell is president of Infoblox Federal. He says military leaders should keep three things at the tops of their priority lists.
Two of these are no real surprise. I mean, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and multi-domain workspace. So obviously, you know, AI is transforming everything. And the Navy certainly is taking advantage of that. And it's important for them when we talk about command and control, advanced data analytics, problem resolution, cybersecurity. AI is an enabler for all of that. And so it's critical. And how they leverage that going into the future is going to be really paramount. Cybersecurity, as naval operations become more digital, it becomes more important every day for them to have the cybersecurity measures in place that enable them to avert the cyber threats. And protect their critical systems, communications, and data. And when you look at multi-domain, think about the Navy. They operate in the sea, the land, the air, space, cyberspace. Being able to operate in all of those domains is unbelievably challenging, particularly across different technology stacks. So, you know, the enhancing the interoperability across that domain, as well as military, other military branches and intelligence communities, and even our nation-state partners, is probably one of the most important things that our Navy can do.
And interoperability is a huge topic here. And this is the first time, I would say, in maybe a year and a half or 2 years that I've heard a lot of conversation revolving around CJAD C2 to exactly the point that you just made about exchanging data and exchanging information with all of the services, not just in the sea services, and with allies and partners as well.
That's critical. And think about, you know, some of our allied partners may not have the level of security and be at the level that we are. So how do we communicate with them? You know, how do you operate in that kind of environment is a real challenge.
It strikes me that there almost will have to be an assessment in using kind of a zero trust framework as to what we allow that ally or that partner to access and what they can't because of the factors that you just described.
Zero trust has been around for a while, as you know. And it's a framework and architecture, so to speak, that allows you know, the different agencies to build their infrastructure and their posture around that. So our nation state partners, I'm sure, are trying to do the same thing. They're just probably not at maybe the level that we are.
I was interested in the way that you set up those three, because you're right, AI, cyber, yeah, not a surprise. Multi-domain workspace, multi-domain operations hasn't gotten as much attention. Why do you think that is, and why do you think now is the time to really focus heavily on it?
It's not as sexy. That's the bottom line.
Okay.
I mean, but it's probably the most important, even when you talk about legacy technologies, being able to communicate, being able to, you know, to operate in a trusting, secure environment. It's really important. It's just not the sexy thing to talk about.
What are the markers that you would like to see the sea services, the military more broadly, focus on to determine whether they're achieving the success that they need to in all three of those, not just the multi-domain?
I think it's going to have to be more partnership with industry and companies like mine at Infoblox, to do that kind of thing. I think that in a lot of respects, industry is advancing technologies that they can take advantage of without having to do the same thing themselves. So they don't have to recreate the wheel. They can focus on what they do, which is the lethality of warfare, and we can handle the rest, and we can work together with them in a way that enables them to do that.
You can read more on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, a 90% success rate for the Pentagon's cyber goals. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
For a very long time, our agency partners have struggled with what to do with the enormous amounts of data that they're generating, that they have access to. And really, in the past several years, they've really started to focus on how to make value out of that data. And the way that many are approaching it is to try and make that data open, right? How do we take advantage of the data that exists and make it usable and reusable for multiple different purposes to serve agency needs?
Welcome back. The Defense Department's Cyber Workforce Strategy Implementation Plan includes 10 objectives. That strategy is about a year old now. Mark Gorak is Principal Director for Resources and Analysis in the Office of the Chief Information Officer at DoD. He gives me this progress report on those objectives.
And I'm happy to say at the end of the year, we accomplished 9, didn't fulfill them all, but accomplished 9 of the 10 of what we set out to do for last year. Some of the highlights there, and I measure all of our implementation based on our 4 pillars of identification, recruitment, development, and retention. So we started off about 2 years ago with a time to hire about 156 days. Last year, our average was 79 days, which beats the OPM standard. The second metric that we achieved last year is we lowered our vacancy rate by over 4%, from over 20% to about 16.8%. Huge improvement. So those are 2. We also stood up the Office of the Cyber Academic Engagement. So that is a huge accomplishment just to stand up that office, because Congress tells us to do things and then they don't give us the funding or the resources to do it. So I'm still working on that side, but I am happy to say I am now the director, another hat of mine, of the Cyber Academic Engagement Office. So those are 3 examples of the 9 we accomplished. I always get asked, well, what's the 10th? What didn't you do? I said, well, 9 out of 10 is still an A in most people's books. The one we did not succeed on, and I won't succeed on that for about another 2 years, is we wanted to establish a development fund for cyber. That's going to have to go through the Pentagon budget process to see if I'm successful there. But I still think 9 out of 10 is pretty good.
Of those 10 objectives, which of those were more difficult for you to achieve, and which of them were you able to achieve in pretty short order?
Great question. So I think the more difficult ones are dealing with culture and getting everybody on board. One of the reasons why I come out and do these and travel is to get the word out. And actually, that is a very difficult thing for me to do. But it has proven and paid big dividends to get the word out. The attention that senior leaders are now giving specifically to the cyber workforce, they actually know what a work rule is a huge measure of success, but it takes a lot of work and background to get there. The second I would say is the culture of our HR. It's a constant push and take, I will say, versus Title V versus Title X and our authorities under cyber accepted service. But just to reduce that time to hire was no trivial event.
Yeah.
So we had over a 60% success rate in what we call our direct hire authority. So that was huge to get that word out and get people trained and actually using that authority that we've had. So those are 2 examples of things that are a little harder to accomplish.
Yeah, the shrinking that time to hire, as you talk about getting it down to 79 days, I hear cyber and HR professionals all over government drooling at being able to do that. What were the pieces that you had to execute to get to that number, and what do you have to do to perpetuate that, to keep that momentum going?
Yeah, so I put this number out publicly. I think we can get down to 25 days. But in order to do that, it's a fundamental shift in the way we do business. It's not, the analogy I like to use is right now, to get to 79, we're on the race horse, going around the track, beating the horse as fast and hard as we can, training the HR community, educating the workforce, letting them know that these authorities exist. And we can only get to 79 days. What I think we need to do is fundamentally change the medium, buy a Ferrari, and let's start going around the racetrack in third gear, right? So I think we have the tools and the authorities we need to do this. We just have to convince some of my fellow federal agencies like OPM to allow us to do things like skill-based hiring, which I'm working directly with them. They're 100% behind this, but we can skip all the lines. I'll know you're qualified, giving you a cyber range test, and then be able to hire you directly. I can really lower my time to hire if I do things like that. As well as some of our younger talent, security clearances are an issue. We have fellowships, we have internships, we have scholarships where a year before they even come to work for us, we're already getting their clearance established. So more of that, scaling those types of things are the challenge to get those things accomplished.
What is the impact that you've seen in all of that and in the implementation of the cyber workforce strategy on speed? As we talked a little bit before we started here, everybody I'm talking to at this conference is talking about speed.
Yeah, so how do we keep up with change? So the first thing I'll say is we now have 73 work roles. Those work roles define the knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks required to do our mission. I have committed to the force that we will be responsive to their needs. So as technology changes, we must update our requirements of the people doing that technology. So every 90 days, I'm making changes. Now, it's a balance because every time I make a change, it influences the entire force. It influences college curriculums. It influences our training bases. How do they keep up if I'm changing every 90 days? And I have made the commitment right now, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to push them. I want colleges to change their curriculum on a as-needed basis within a semester, not a 2-year cycle. I want our institutions of training for cyber to be continuously updating their curriculum as we go. So these are the kind of thoughts and processes we have to put in place to keep up. So I am moving out, and I'm hoping that others are catching up as we go. I hear the pushback, and I have made the decision we're going to keep up with our adversaries to maintain our competitive advantage.
What have you done what have you seen regarding retention as you've executed on the cybersecurity workforce strategy?
So retention is always a challenge for us. One of our goals is pay parity. We have the authorities in place to achieve near pay parity across our workforce. So for instance, we have something called the 3 R's: recruiting, relocating, and retention incentives. When I started this a year and a half ago, we had less than 0.1% of those authorities being used for our workforce. Today, we have over 4%. That's a 400% improvement, by the way, but that's just math. And I'm pushing for more of that. I then measure that, and any critical shortage we have, I hold the services accountable to increase that. I then, if they don't, or the numbers don't go up for retention, I then provide additional incentives to the targeted local market supplement. So we're paying our people more money. Right now, today, our metrics are showing that the retention rate for cyber is better than the retention rate of our overall civilian workforce. So that is great news. We're retaining. We're still short. So last year, I told you we were short about 30,000. At the end of last year, we were short about 28,000. Today, as of Friday, we're short 20,000. That is a huge improvement, but it's still a long way to go.
We have less than a minute left. How do you maintain that momentum and keep driving that number smaller and smaller, Mark?
So again, what we appear to be doing seems to be working. So I'm going to keep pushing. I think we have to get the fundamental cultural change that the cyber workforce will cost us more money. If we want to get to pay parity and have our people be rewarded and maintain and keep the best, we have to make sure they're qualified to do the job, and we have to pay them appropriately for that qualification. That, to me, is the key to our success.
You can read more about the Pentagon's cyber workforce strategy on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment.
And so if you look at a network detect and respond, which a lot of people have deployed IDS for, you just need to go much further than that. You need the AI capability, you need the advanced, sophisticated detections, and then you need to be able to highlight that to the analysts in a way that they can take actions before those incidents becomes really harmful.
Welcome back. You're paying less for your thrift savings plan account now than you did before. You'll learn why and how the TSP is driving down its fees on the FedGov Today podcast this week. You can follow the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your shows. And you can always listen on demand at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30 with a look at the future of the Inspector General community in the federal government and changes coming to the way the federal government buys what it needs. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you next Sunday. Thanks for watching. Have a great week. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.
If something were to happen in the Pacific, could we respond, could we strike in kind across all domains with all of our services in tangent with the full power of the US military? And I think most people are going to pause before they answer that question. And to me, that's where IT superiority comes back in. Because if you don't know the answer to that question, then you probably don't have the information you need to understand all the power you have at hand and how it works together. So a big piece of superiority and deterrence is visibility, consolidation. You know, my biggest piece of advice to the military would be to leverage the power that they have.